really dive with that. The Junction Cafe is sort of part two of our Veterans Day celebration, time to honor veterans, time to respect, in our daily lives, what country means. You've got a chance to hear from the study small class, leaders and cities, and work with the leaders and the president and some of their children. So now we have, for most of our audience, those here live at Junction Cafe and those that are following on social media, our state representative, Trey Williams. Hope you get his email newsletter. I do. You sign up and appreciate address. A lot of things that are happening in the community, which is super important, and we'll probably have a chance to touch on that. But really, the reason we were just on here and spend here is because of your own service. So tell us a little bit, why'd you go into the Marines?
Oh, I'm not often asked that question, and I appreciate it because it allows me to kind of go back to the beginning of the story. I originally went into the Navy ROTC program as a way to pay for school. So I'm a military brat, meaning that my father was in the military for his entire career in the Air Force. And as you might be able to imagine, you're not saving enough money to send kids to college on a military income. So it was pretty predestined that I was going to have to go in the military as a way of affording school. That's exactly how he did it, going to North Carolina State. So I went to Duke University on a Navy ROTC scholarship. And after a couple of years on the Navy side of things, I decided to transition over to the Marine Corps. And I got my commission from Duke and eventually went off to flight school to fly the F-18.
Low altitude flights at what mile per hour?
Yeah, so I was actually more like Goose. I wasn't a pilot. I was a Goose, the guy in back, as they like to say.
You're still in
a two-seat F-18. And what we did in the Gulf War is ours was the first two-seat F-18 in the Marine Corps, two-seat F-18 squadron in the Marine Corps. So we deployed to Desert Storm with one purpose, which was to race around the desert at 100 or 200 feet, about 400 knots, finding targets, marking them with white phosphorus rockets so that bombers at high altitude that could bomb from high altitude and not come down where the risk was as great where we were. And I did that for 56 combat missions, and our theater of operations was entirely inside of Kuwait. So, for example, with the Air Force, the Navy were stacked up, in the Marine Corps were stacked up bombers in Saudi Arabia or out in the Gulf. They couldn't bomb inside of Kuwait without being controlled by one of our F-18s. There was two F-18s from our squadron, airborne 24 hours a day for the entirety of the war.
Wow. And how old are you at this point when you're in this aircraft?
So this is 91, so I'm like 24 years old.
24 years old. You're trained on this. I don't even know what the thing would cost.
Yeah, we said it all the time. I can't believe the United States government would trust us with a $100 billion airplane zipping around at 400 knots, but they did. And
it helps you get your education.
Yep.
Right. But it also, what does it do going into the Gulf? As a kid, to defend the ideals that you probably don't even fully understand, right? Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there's something about this that above self, and I think it is worth honoring and being thankful for, especially as an American citizen, where I think we do take a lot for granted, having traveled around the world. Reflect on that for a minute. I mean, that's where to me, that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, as far as like a Veterans Day appreciation.
Yeah, but these are really good questions, and not questions that I'm often asked, so I appreciate it. And I would like to transition a little bit away from me and into others, because that's kind of what my service is about also.
That's what tonight's about too, so I'm with you.
Yeah. But I can tell you what it was like for me, right? And you're exactly right. I'm a young man in combat. My father and my stepfather both did 2 tours in Vietnam at about the same age. And I call my stepdad like once a week from the war. And he often said, he's like, listen, flying will never be the same again when you come back to the United States and fly. So, it's not quite enjoy combat, but it's like be present in the moment, right? Because there's this tendency, I remember vividly sitting on the tarmac before my first combat mission saying, about to go in combat, and I was like having difficulty even punching in waypoints into our INS. This is all pretty satellite style stuff, and trying to set up the navigation on the tarmac. And I just like took a breath, like, you know everything you're about to do. The only unknown is who's shooting at it, and you can cope with that because you've been trained. So you lean on your training, and you find courage in that, and then you just go do it. It's kind of like if you run 20 miles, running 26 for a marathon, it's just go do it, right? And then once I started doing it, you settle into the ease of it and start to remember who it is that you're actually fighting for. And for us as Marines, especially in Marine Corps aviation, it's the guy on the ground, right? That's the person who's facing direct fire and everything about your essence in that aircraft. And they teach it to you when you're an officer in officer candidate schools, like everything is about that rifleman on the ground. Everything is about that rifleman. And when you start to contextualize your service outside of yourself, about someone else, it gets a lot easier. And that's what I do every single day in this job. Is I take it outside of me. It's not about next November's election. I serve my neighbor, my friends, and these people that are in this room today every single day for them, and not about me. Next November takes care of itself. And I actually said this to my staff today when we were having lunch after the parade. Like, because there weren't many Republicans there. It was mostly Democrats because we're having a shift of political parties right now. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. That happens. Sure. I get along with every single one of those people. Every single one. And I said to my staff today at lunch, it's like, if we get to next year and I lose, and we spent the entire 2 years being good people, doing good things, I can move on to my next chapter knowing that I made a difference for 2 years or 4 years or 10 years, whatever it is. Do as much good for as long as the people give it to you, and that's okay. So anyway.
No, I've interviewed vets, right, for the magazine. I've been very fortunate, and I know there's service, and we're so grateful for that. Like, that's what this is about. And then there's honorable service, and then there's, and you've got, a number of accommodations for valor and different things that, and a lot of vets don't even always want to talk about this stuff, right? So, again, we really appreciate your service, both abroad and at home. I think in this day and age, it takes, I think we can all agree that it must take an incredible person to even want to run for office. I mean, holy cow, just the fire that you take, as soon as you sign your name to something at this point. And I know that just published in a magazine.
I'm going to tell you, 2020 was far more stressful than combat.
yeah. Right? It's a different kind of mind, but service nonetheless, right? And there are some people, and whether they who care about the common good and the community, and beyond their own household. I think that's what these guys are doing, right? Like there's a spirit there of, hey, there's other people. It's beyond me. Right. There's other people out there. I'm going to help them, and we have different motives to do that. But I think it's definitely applauded when we see it.
And I want to pick up on one thing that you talked about, which is veterans tending to not tell their stories. And I'm running into that more and more. And I'm just saying I'm done with that, right? I'm pulling veterans into my story, this story that I'm living right now. And I'm like, I need you to start talking about it. And the reasons why they don't tell their stories are actually themselves important, right? They don't want their suffering to be communicated to you because they want to bear it themselves. That's part of their selflessness. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about writ large, all veterans, right? They don't want to burden you with their pain. They don't want any accolades for what they did. They don't see it as heroic. They sincerely do not see it as heroic. They see it as their absolute duty for the man and woman on their left and right. Duty. There's no heroism in that. That was their responsibility. And when you finally go into combat, it isn't about medals, heroism, bragging to mom and dad, passing that on to your daughter or your son. It's about protecting the person on your left and right. And they don't need to tell that story. What they're not telling you is that the pain lingers for a lifetime. It lingers for a lifetime. And I speak often to veterans groups. And as you can imagine, veterans groups are singularly elderly, right? It's not often that I'm finding an Iraq or an Afghanistan veteran in these groups that I'm talking to. I said, I want you to try hard to step outside of yourself as a senior veteran, and I'm now one of them. The war in Vietnam doesn't look like home, right? We don't live in a jungle. The war in Korea doesn't look like home. We don't live in the kind of terrain that is Korea. Some parts of the country does, but on the whole, that combat zone doesn't look like home. My war over the desert, and there truly was a desert, doesn't look like home. These guys are fighting from the back of vehicles in a convoy on a highway in an urban and a suburban environment, in and amongst populations. Just try to intellectualize that for a moment. Now imagine you're driving down Baltimore Pike or 95 in your truck, right? And every overpass looks like a threat. The back of every stop sign is a potential hiding spot for a bomb. Because the vigilance that you have in Iraq and Afghanistan, or you did for the last 20 years, is that every turn, every pothole is a potential IED that's going to take out your entire squad or maim you for life, right? Because that's what they were seeing. Not only were they losing friends, but modern combat medicine is such that you could be ripped apart and still saved. Ripped apart and still saved.
Yeah.
And so I got to tell you, I personally started to like really come to this realization in the withdrawal of Afghanistan. And I don't engage in any of the political talk about how that went. My only concern is the impact it has on veterans. And I can tell you, it was unbelievably painful for me. And if it was unbelievably painful for me, what must it have been like for an Iraqi or an Afghanistan veteran, right? The questioning of what did I go through, and it wasn't just the questioning, but the imagery coming back takes you immediately back to all that stuff. So that's what drives me.
Well, and I appreciate the context. Again, it's hard for us to know, that haven't experienced this, but we're trying. And I think I would ask you just in closing, again, we're just gonna get ready here to write some notes to send over to the vets at the Coatesville Veterans Hospital.
Yep.
Some of us, it's hard to relate. But what would you say to these guys over here? What's something that you think that they would love to hear?
It's easy. It's actually easy. And I think some civilians have a hard time accessing just how easy this is. I love you, right? We just don't say it, right? Even as Marine fathers, it's hard to say it to our own children. And I had to push past this barrier that my dad had with I love you. And I say it often to my own children because I think they need to hear it. I know my children need to hear it, but these veterans need to hear it. Sometimes I was asked yesterday, what would you say to a veteran? It's like, thank you for your service. It's like, yeah, that's the easy part. The hard part is an actual hug and an I love you. Thank you so much for everything you've given. And say that in these cards.
All right. Well, thank you so very much. Again, I am just so grateful that you were able to make time to talk to us and encourage these young men here who, they're high school students and, they've joined us to lead, already at that age in different ways. So.
And I do want to say to them, you guys are on an unbelievable path already, that you have been internalized already the sense of duty and selflessness sets you apart from a lot of people. And I really look forward to seeing what you're going to become. Thank you for doing this.
Well, listen, we'll have you back anytime. We're just down the road and we love just hopping on here and talking to people. So appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.